So hello everyone and welcome back. Today we are going to talk about GenAI. So if I talk about the agenda that we have for today, we are going to touch upon basically two things, right? So let's discuss the agenda. Number one, we will talk about GenAI. So we will try to understand the concept of GenAI and what exactly is GenAI, how do we use GenAI, right? And second thing, we will try to use some of the GenAI models via Python, right? Via Python code and using the API key. So these are some of the agenda items that we are going to cover in today's video. Okay, so let me get started, and first we will cover some of the theoretical concepts, post which I will have a practical session wherein we will try to incorporate some of the GenAI models using the Python code, right? So let's get started, and we will first try to understand the concept of AI, Gen AI. Let's talk about all of this, right? So the very first thing, let's try to understand what is AI, right? So at high level, if I have to explain what is AI, so it is nothing but it is a branch of computer science. We can say it is a branch of computer science that deals with the creation of intelligent agents and systems that can reason, learn, or act anonymously. So this is going to be the definition of artificial intelligence. It is basically a branch of computer science, and what it produces is some kind of intelligent agents or systems. And these intelligent agents or systems, how they help the humans is they can reason, learn, and act anonymously, right? So this is the definition of artificial intelligence. Now if I have to talk about Gen AI, right? So what is Gen AI? Gen AI is basically generative AI, right? And what is generative AI? It is a type of AI technology. It is a type of AI technology that can produce various type of content, or that can rather generate various type of content. And when I say various kind of content, we can have contents like text, we can have images, audio, video. It can even produce code, right? It can be your Python code, it can be your SQL code, and so on, right? So all these kind of data we can actually generate using GenAI. So basically it is also one kind of AI technology. Now there is one more part to AI, or I would say the trending topic that is going on today, that is called as agentic AI, right? So AI, it can have multiple branch, but then if I talk about two of the most trending topics that we have today, we have Gen AI, which is basically the generative AI, and we have agents or the AI agents, that is basically the part of agentic AI. Now, agentic AI, I plan to discuss in the next video. Today, we are going to learn about Gen AI in detail. Now, let's talk about generative AI model. So, how the generative AI model works is, you have something called as input. From this input, what you do is you give this input to a model, and then this model in turn returns some output. and this output is generally your text, images, or it can even be your video, code, and so on, right? Basically, generate below type of content, right? So it can generate text, images, video, and code. That is why this model is called as generative AI. Now, whenever we talk about Gen AI or the output that we get with Gen AI, we should not get confused with whether something that we get as an output from machine learning model is Gen AI or not. Whenever we talk about output of machine learning models, right? So, or maybe we can say output of Gen AI models. So, whenever you say that your output is coming something like, maybe you get natural language, or maybe if you see image, text, audio, video, etc., right? So all of this is basically your Gen AI. You can say it is Gen AI. But then when you see your output is coming something like number, right? Or maybe some discrete values, or maybe you see some class, or maybe even for that matter probability, right? So when you see this as the output, this is not Gen AI. Okay, so you have to understand this thing. It should be generative in nature, right? So natural language is something that can be generated, image can be generated, text can be generated, video can be generated, code can be generated, right? But you see output is coming as number, right? It is not something that is generated. It is just an output, right? Some class, some probability. These are not generated values or generated content, right? This is just some output. So we cannot call this section as generative AI. This section can be called as generative AI. Now, in mathematical terms, I am not going very deep in mathematics, but let's try to understand some of the basic items. So when we say for Gen AI, for Gen AI, what we can say is, if you remember, there is something called as y equal to f of x. This we have learned in the mathematics, right? So y is a function of x. So generative AI, you can, if you have to learn, the fundamental of generative AI, always remember that y is equal to f of x. And in terms of Gen AI, what typically happens is y is basically the output of Gen AI model or application, basically application, right? So for example, if gpt is the model if gpt is the model, chat gpt is basically an application. So whatever you see as the output is called as y. And also, when you say x, this x, it is nothing but your input, right? So the input that you provide to your application, the Gen AI application. And when we talk about this f, it is nothing but your model, right? So this is how the generative AI works. You give some input to your model, and in turn you get some output, right? The output typically is your natural language, image, text file, audio file, video file, code, etc., etc. It cannot be this category. Okay, so these are some of the high level concepts that we have to remember for Gen AI. Now let's talk about LLMs. So LLMs are basically your large language models. These are LLMs, right? So what are LLMs? Basically, they are one type of Gen AI models, one Gen AI type, right? So if you remember in Gen AI, basically what we get is different type of Gen AI models. So for example, if you remember with Gen AI, we can get output, we can get output in the form of text, video, image, code, and so on. So whenever the output is in the form of text, that kind of Gen AI model is called as large language model. Okay. Now, if we have to take some of the example of large language model, right? So there can be different example. For example, we have GPT-4. GPT-4 is a model that is developed by OpenAI, right? And it is used in ChatGPT. Okay. So when I say ChatGPT, GPT-4, this is basically a model. This is the organization that has developed this model, and this model is being utilized in this LLM application that is called as ChatGPT, which is basically a Gen AI, particularly the LLM application. So what are some of the other examples that we can take for Gen AI, right? So there can be different models, right? So based on input and output, there can be there can be different Gen AI models. So let's take some example. For example, you have text to text. When you provide input in the form of text and the output is also a text, that is called as text to text model. For example, you can have something called as translation, right? So you have a language, for example, you have English, and you want to convert this English input to maybe French, right? So you are using some translation model, maybe Google Translator, right? So this is text to text. One more example can be text to image. Then you can have similarly something called as text to video. Similarly, you can have text to task. Yeah, these are there are models that can do your work when you provide a text, right? So all these are different type of models. Now let's learn about how the Gen AI models generate content. Okay, now let's learn about how how Gen AI models generate content, be it any kind of content. How do we get this content, right? So basically what happens here is organizations train train the models and algorithms with enormous data set, enormous data set, right? So what typically happens is, now let's try to understand, or let's talk more about algorithms versus models, right? So algorithm, if I have to explain what is algorithm, so it is nothing but some set of rules, some set of rules to process data. some set of rules to process data. And when we talk about models, it is nothing but the final outcome, the final outcome used to predict output, right? So we can say that algorithms are basically used to train the models, right? Now what can be some of the examples? So when I talk about some of the examples from algorithm, we can have examples like decision tree. Yeah, you can have neural network, or basically the artificial neural network that is used in deep learning, right? You have something called as k-means. So all of this is basically your algorithm. That is the set of rules, right? In decision tree, you have some set of rules, right? It works differently. Similarly, neural network also has some different way using which the models can be trained. Similarly, we can have k-means and there can be other algorithms as well. Now, what can be some of the models? So model is basically the final outcome. So for example, the model can be GPT, any version of GPT, GPT-4 maybe, right? Similarly, you can have, from Google, you have Gemini. So Gemini, any version, maybe 1.5, and so on, right? So this is the difference between algorithm and models. Now, typically, when we talk about algorithms, I want to talk more about algorithms. Let's talk more about algorithms. Basically, these are of two types. One is we can train, we can train, right? And second is organizations can train, right? So when we are training a model, it is basically a custom model, or it's called custom learning, right? Custom learning. And when the organizations are training the model, the models are called as pre-trained models, pre-trained models. And this type of learning is basically called as transfer learning. Okay, what is the example? What is the example now? So when I talk about the organization can train, right? So what can be the example? Or example can be, you know, you have models like GPT, you have models like Gemini, etc., right? So, or maybe some model from XAI, right? There are different models, right? So all these are basically your pre-trained models. So the organizations have already developed. So for example, Gemini. So Google has already developed this model. Organization has developed. GPT, OpenAI has already developed this, right? XAI, X has already developed it, right? So organizations already have some pre-trained models, right? Obviously when you want to develop a model, it will require some funding, it will require huge infrastructure setup, right? Obviously we as individual will not be able to afford that much, right? We will not have that much money, right? So when I say we, it is individuals. So individuals can train or organizations can train, right? So this is called custom learning and this is called pre-trained models. Okay. What instead we can do is we can leverage these models, right? And so let's talk more about this. So what we can do is custom learning, right? When we say custom learning, it is the individuals who are developing the model, right? So what we can do is there is something called as fine tuning. So we can do the fine tuning of the pre-trained models, right? Now, what is the meaning of fine tuning? So, for example, let's take a very good example now. You have a model that kind of differentiates between human beings and non-human beings. Okay, and this model is developed by an organization called as ABC organization. Okay, now this model works perfectly fine. No need of fine tuning as of now. If you want to use it in its raw format or the original format, you can very well do it. But then if you feel for some reason that you want to train this model with your set of data as well. So for example, it can say that, okay, this is a person, this is not a person, and you go to model, you ask whether I am a person or not. The model will reply saying that yes, you are a person. Okay, you are a human being. But then if you ask what is my name, right, the model is not trained for this kind of data. Or when you supply your some weird image to the model, right, and ask whether it is human or not, it may not be able to tell the answer, right, because it is not trained for your data. If you want to see the response coming from the model for these kind of questions, you need to fine tune the model with your data set, right? So this is called as fine tuning. Okay, now let us talk more about fine tuning or the different type of models that we have. So what happens is the different type of machine learning models. So machine learning models, I would say three type. One is your custom model that we already discussed. Second is your pre-trained pre-trained models, and third is your fine-tuned models. Yeah. So the custom models will be used by individuals, or rather trained or developed by individuals. Pre-trained models mostly by organizations, and fine-tuned models again by individuals, individuals, individuals with fine-tuning. Now, when to use these kind of models? So typically, when I talk about custom model, whenever you have small problems, right? Small problems, you can have some small machine learning models that can be developed. Pre-trained models, whenever you have to use transfer learning, what is the meaning of transfer learning? So somebody else has developed, so for example, Meta has developed a model for me, and this model I am using, right? So basically all I am doing is transfer learning, right? So kind of big problems. And when you have complex models, right, model, that is big plus problems. So you have a big problem, but that also is customized for your data set, right? You are doing the fine tuning on the pre-trained model. So this is basically used for complex problems, right? So these are the levels of the machine learning model, right? This is the level 1, this is the level 2, and this is the level 3. At level 1 you have your custom model, here you have your pre-trained model, level 2, and level 3 basically you have fine-tuned models. Now now let's talk about some examples of Gen AI models. Examples of Gen AI models, right? So different organization have different models currently in the market. Let's talk about some of the most important offerings that we have currently. So we have OpenAI, right? From OpenAI, there are models like GPT models, Specifically, we have GPT-4 or GPT-4 Turbo, right? And these models are used to develop applications like ChatGPT. There is one more application of GenAI that is using OpenAI's GPT model that is called as Sora, right? Sora. And what it does is it creates video from text, text to video. There can be other examples as well. So we have Google, and from Google we have Gemini models and the application that are based out of Gemini models. Similarly, we also have Meta, Meta or Facebook. So from Facebook also you have some models. You have Llama, Llama model from Facebook. Again, this is also one example of Gen AI. Then there can be other examples as well, right? So you have something called as Mistral AI, Mistral AI. Okay, you can learn about all of this. I'm just naming some of the commonly available Gen AI models today. So we have Mistral AI, that is Mistral 7B. This is the application that is based out of this model, Mistral AI. You have Amazon, and from Amazon you have Bedrock. You also have Anthropic, Anthropic, right? The application is called as Claude, right? You also have something called as Cohere, Cohere, and the application is called as Command. You have XAI. We were talking about XAI, right? So XAI, the application is called as Grok, right? You have IBM, right? And the application is called as Watson, right? So all these are some of the examples of Gen AI models. Let's talk something about prompt engineering. What is the meaning of prompt engineering? Prompt engineering. Now, in order to talk to Gen AI model, we need to establish communication, and that can be done using the prompt engineering, right? So whatever we type is called as prompt, right? So for example, you ask what is the capital, what is the capital of India, right? So this text that you provide to the Gen AI model is basically called as prompt. Okay. Now this is simple, right? This is what is prompt. So whatever we type is called as prompt. And while talking to the Gen AI model, we can give some examples also. Okay. So for example, we can give one example. So for example, when I say that please, please provide, please provide a code for printing sum of first 10 numbers, and it should be like something this, right? Okay, so what you are giving, you are giving one example while giving the prompt. So whenever you give one example to the prompt to the Gen AI, it is called as, it is called as one shot, right? When you don't give any example, right, maybe some prompt, this prompt or any other prompt where you do not give any example, this is called as zero shot. Okay, so terminology is important. Understand what is one shot, what is zero shot. So whenever you give any examples, to the Gen AI model, it is called as shot. You don't give the example, it is zero shot. You give one example, it is one shot. You give two example, it is two shots. Okay. And when you give more than two examples, more than two examples, it is called as few shot. Few shot. Okay. So you have zero, you have one, you have two, and you have few. Okay. All right. Now I think let's get started, and let's talk about uh, the practical part. And now we will try to understand how to use the Python code to access any of the GenAI model. And we are going to use the model that is called as Gemini model, right? So some Gemini model we will use using the API key, and we will try to use this Gemini model from the Python code. So let's get started on this. Now let's get started. So the very first thing that we have to do is we have to open something called as Google AI Studio, right? So I'll open Google AI Studio, and when I go to Google AI Studio, right? So this is where I'll get the access to the models, right? So I will have some Python code, and in that Python code I want to incorporate the link to the chat GPT models or any kind of GenAI model. So I'm using the Gemini model, right? So where can I get the API key? I will need some authentication whenever I have to connect, right? So what basically happens is uh, so if I have to explain here, so what actually happens is how we are going to do is how to how to access GenAI, or in this case Gemini models using Python, right? So you need to have the Python code, right? You need to have the Python code. I'll provide the Python code to you. You need to have the API keys, right, to connect with Gemini models, right? And third thing, you need to use Python code with API keys, right, to leverage Gemini model, right? So these are the three high level steps. Okay. So I will give you the Python code, and we'll try to understand the Python code as well. But first thing, let's try to get the API keys and incorporate that in the Python code and leverage the API keys and the Python code and use the Gemini model. So this is what we plan to do. So in order to get the API key, what you have to do is you have to go to Google AI Studio. You have to click on Get API key. Once you click on Get API key, there is this option that says Create API key. Click on this, and then you need to search for some project. So search for some random project, maybe Gemini API, and then again click on Create API key in existing project. Once you do this, it will load for a while, and it will share the API key that you can copy. Okay, so just copy this API key. Now what you have to do is you have to go to Google Colab, right? So just like your Jupyter notebook, you can go to Google Colab as well. So here we will write our code. Now where is the code? So you can get the code in any many tech Discord channel, right? So I have already pasted the link in the description. All you have to do is you have to go to the Discord channel. So just go to the Discord channel here like this, and you will be able to find several files under AIML. There is this Gemini code, Python code. Okay, so download the code and save it in your local. Once you save it in your local, you need to go to the upload section on the Google Colab, browse for that file and select that file. Okay, so that file will get loaded. Okay, now this is already loaded. Now what we have to do is we have to understand the code first. So let us try to understand some of the code that I have already available for you. What we are going to do is, so the very first thing we have is pip install the streamlit and the npm install local tunnel, right? So what are these? Basically these are not needed for now, so we can just comment these out and run. Okay, so comment these out and run. Okay, so before that, let me try to explain. Now let's talk about this code. So what is Streamlit? So Streamlit is basically a Python framework that is used for the web application, and mainly it is used for the machine learning model. And in the first command, we are trying to do the pip install. If you don't know what is pip install, it is Python package manager, right? So you install this framework using the pip, right? In the second line of code, basically we are doing the npm install. Npm, just like, so pip is Python package manager, npm is node.js package manager, right? So you are doing the npm install for local tunnel. Again, what is local tunnel? It is also a Python framework that is used to expose the local web server. So you have some of the files in your local web server, and if you want to host those files over the internet without the need for deployment, you don't want to deploy, but you have something in your local that you want to present to the public, right? The public URL. So in that case, you can use something called as npm install local tunnel. Okay, so for now these are not needed. What you can do is you can just comment this out and run. Now how to run? There is this run command, right? So you can either use this, or as a shortcut you can press command, or as a shortcut you can press shift and enter. So shift enter, and I am running this. Okay, so it is successful. You can see this tick mark, right? So it is successful. Now second thing is, what we have is pip install Google Generative AI. Again, no need of this pip install, because we are already in the Google environment, right? We are using the Google Colab, so no need to pip install the Google Generative AI, right? So basically this code is trying to install the Google Generative AI package that can be used to interact with the Gemini models, right? So you have different Gemini models, and if you have to uh, connect to those GenAI models, you need to pip install the Google Generative AI. But this is not needed in this case because we are already using the Google Colab. So just comment this out and run this using shift and enter. So this is also successful. Now the third piece of code. The third piece of code is import Google Generative AI as GenAI API key equal to some API key, and GenAI.configure API underscore key equal to API underscore key, right? So in this module, basically what we are trying to do is, right, we are trying to import the generative AI as GenAI, right? And then using the API key. Okay. So here we will need the API key. So I have already copied my API key, right, from here. So just copy and hard code that and paste it here, right? Just paste it here. And then you can run this piece of code as well, shift and enter. Okay, now you can see that this is also successful. Similarly, the next piece of code we can similarly run for m in GenAI.list models print m.name. This piece of code is basically trying to retrieve and print the name of all the available AI models. So in the different AI models that we have from Google GenAI API, right, we are trying to get the names, right? So there are different model, all these models, right? So we will just have to run this. So just press shift and enter, and then you will see that it will get succeeded. So it is also successful, and you can see the name of the models. Now the next piece of code, this one, again, model equal to this. So out of these models that we just retrieved in the above step, we want to use this particular model. We just give the name. You can change the name also, right? You can change the name of the model, and then we are saying chat, right? We are saying initiate the chat. So just run this piece of code, shift plus enter. It is successful. Okay. In the next piece of code, if you see what is happening in the next piece of code, my chat is already initialized and now I have started interacting with the model, right? So what I'm doing is I'm asking a question: who is the Indian cricket men's team captain currently, right? So this is what my question is. Or maybe I can change who is ICC president currently. Okay, and I will try to run this. So shift plus enter. Now if you see, the response is coming as this. Okay, now this is not the very latest data, but then whatever you see on UI, the same output you are getting here. All right, so this is what we have done currently. So using 1.5 Gemini model, we are trying to use the Gemini chat. Okay, similarly, you can again give the new question: how old is he? And if you press shift plus enter, right, you will get this as the answer, right? Similarly, you can have other questions as well. Maybe I'll delete it for now, but this is what you have. So using this method, basically you can install the Gemini API with your Python code and leverage the capabilities of the GenAI model. So I really hope you enjoyed today's video. Please like, share, and subscribe. And I hope to see you in the next video.